Page 138. Here we go. The last line, like we said, was literally open up population police as Jen's dad and Luke were standing there at Jen's house. So here we go. Before Luke had a chance to move, Jen's dad had picked him up and thrust him into the closet. There's a secret door in the back, he hissed. Use it. Luke groped blindly, fighting through what he felt like piles of hair. Behind him, he could hear Jen's dad yelling, I'm coming, I'm coming. That's a $12,000 door. If you break it down, you're going to pay. Bro, a $12,000 door? That's like more than a car, right? Then Luke heard the computer making a beep, 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 and Jen's dad muttering. Fine time for them to discover efficiency. Come on, connect. The pounding at the door grew louder, and a gruff voice yelled out, You got 3 seconds, George. Luke dug deeper into the closet. He couldn't even find the back wall, let alone any secret door. And then he heard a splintering sound from the front of the house. Seconds later, there were stomping footsteps in the computer room. What's the meaning of this? It was Jen's dad's voice coming from the hall, full of outrage. If he hadn't witnessed it himself, Luke never would have guessed that Jen's dad had been crying only moments before. He sounded too forceful, too assured, too confident that he was right and anyone who opposed him was wrong. Then stomping stopped. From deep inside the closet, Luke heard someone snicker. Caught you with your pants down, eh, George? Yes, very funny, Jen's father replied, not sounding the least bit amused. There was a sound that could have been a zipper being zipped. Has it come to this? A man can't even go to the bathroom without his door being broken down by a bunch of morons with power complexes? And you'll pay for that door, I assure you. If Luke had been one of the population police, Jen's dad would have scared him to pieces. Luke would have backed out muttering, Oh, I'm sorry. He never would have believed that Jen's dad was hiding a third child. Hopefully, Luke paused in his burrowing into the Talbot's closet. But the voice that answers Jen's father carried only the slightest edge of doubt. Come off it, George. You know we're entitled to search and seizure. We have reports of a computer being used for illegal purposes just a half hour ago. You're even bigger fools than I thought, Jen's dad answered. Don't any of you read your memos? I reported to Central Command this morning that I was going to continue my sting operation in the illegal chat rooms. See? I wrote, Where's Jen? And, Hello, is anybody there? Which is what some lost, confused, third child who missed the rally might write. And you're so low-ranking that you don't know I was pretending to be a guerrilla leader, Jen, all along. Did you miss the commendation ceremony where I was rewarded for the disposal of 40 illegals? Is Dad really doing? Is he tricking him or what? Yeah. Right? You think? I hope. Luke wondered that Jen's dad could say her name without a voice giving him away. If Luke didn't know Jen, hadn't known her, he corrected himself with a wince. And if he didn't know how much she trusted her father, he would have been certain that Jen's father had double-crossed her. As it was, his head swam with fear that Jen's father still might betray him. How could he trust anyone who spoke so coldly of the disposal of third children? Luke struggled on through the closet, reaching a stack of blankets in the back. Finally, he touched the wall, but everything he felt was smooth. Jen's father said there was a door. There had to be a door. The voices from outside the closet were muffled now. See the memo? I'm sure it's on your desk back in the office with all the paperwork you never read. Jen's dad raised his voice so Luke could hear him clearly. Or can you even read? The population police officer ignored the insult. Show us on the computer. Very well. Luke prayed that Jen's dad had something to show them. He could not find the door, though he ran his fingers along the wall again and again. His heart was beating so loudly, he was sure the population police could hear him. All he could hear of the population police and Jen's fathers were mutterings. Then one of the officer's voice rang out. You're lying, George. We're going to search. Just because of a computer malfunction? Fine. It's not my problem. Luke was stunned by the indifference in Jen's father's voice. But when you don't find anything, and you won't, you know I'm entitled to the illegal search and seizure benefits granted to barons, and I will press charges. Should I use the extra money on caviar or champagne? Oh, George, you wouldn't really sue. You don't think so? Then go ahead. Start here. Suddenly the closet was flooded with light. Luke stifled a gasp. How could Jen's father have flung open the door of the very place Luke was hiding? Desperately, Luke yanked a blanket over his head. None of the population police answered Jen's father, but the pattern of shadows that fell on Luke's blanket made him think the population police were standing right in the doorway of the closet. He heard hangers scraping against the metal bar, and then the population police walked away. Confused and terrified, Luke remained huddled under the blanket. He could hear muffled footfalls elsewhere in the house, and he was certain they'd be returning to the computer room any minute. Before they killed him, he hoped they would let him go back to his parents and tell them how much he loved them. He could apologize to Matthew and Mark, too, for not appreciating the checkers and card games they played with him when he knew that they'd rather be outside. And probably he should apologize to his parents for disobeying and coming to Jen's house in the first place. Except, even scared to death from being found, he couldn't scrape up full regret for that. Anyhow, it wasn't likely that they'd lead him to see his parents before they killed him. He'd have to protect his parents and refuse to even reveal who they were. Luke's mind was still racing with frantic plans when he heard someone coming back to the computer room. There was only one set of footsteps, so he dared to hope. You could have swept up the glass on your way out. It was Jen's dad. Luke strained to hear an answer, but none came. Were the population police gone? Luke kept his head down. He heard Jen's dad wading into the closet, and then he pulled the blanket off of Luke and clamped his hand over Luke's mouth. Luke started to struggle until he read the words on the paper Jen's dad held in front of his face. They're gone. You're safe, but don't talk. Luke relaxed and nodded to show he would obey. Jen's dad released him, flipped over the paper, and began writing furiously. House bugged now. What's that mean?
Like they put like something there?
Yeah, bugged means like listening devices or like cameras they put in there. Luke gave Jen's dad a puzzled look. Oh, sorry, I gave away the answer. But, he started to say, then remembered and stopped. He took the pen from Jen's dad and wrote, bugged? Ants? Roaches? Jen's dad shook his head frantically. Bugs equals little listening devices. Population police hear everything. That's why you can't talk. They do that when a bust is unsuccessful. Even left one bug on me. Jen's dad turned around and pointed. Luke saw a small disc sticking to the back of his collar. Luke frowned and wrote on the paper, why not take it off? Jen's dad shook his head. Safer this way. As long as they think they hear everything, they won't come back. Jen's dad pointed to the hairy lumps on the hangers behind him. Bribed them with fur coats. Very rare. Very valuable. Luke looked at the coats. There did seem to be a lot fewer of them now. Are they animal skins? Why would anyone want such a thing? He couldn't ask, though, because Jen's dad had already scribbled more. Just bought time. My goose probably cooked now. I didn't file that memo. They'll find out. What's it mean his goose is cooked? It means he's in trouble, like he's caught, is what it means. Luke reached for the pen. What will they do? Jen's dad shook his head. Don't know, he wrote. I've survived this kind of thing before, but everything's chancy now. The fact that they got here so fast, they have it in for me. Weakly, Luke leaned his head against the closet wall. That reminded him of his frantic search along the surface. He reached for the paper and wrote, Where's the door? Jen's dad pulled out a new sheet of paper, shaking his head. He wrote, Isn't one. Just wanted you to go to the back of the closet. Luke buried his face in his hands. Jen's dad was a good liar. There was no doubt about that. How could Luke trust him? Luke raised his head and watched as Jen's dad scribbled something else on the paper. His expression was so full of concern, and Luke knew, somehow, that he was trustworthy. He easily could have turned Luke in and gotten praise and another commendation ceremony. But how confusing to never know when someone was lying. Jen's dad turned the paper to face Luke. It said, So, want fake ID or not? Luke gulped. After a minute, he wrote back, Am I safe? if I don't? Jin's dad seemed to be weighing the question. He narrowed his eyes and wrote, Probably. They're after me now, not you. If they really thought there was an illegal here, they wouldn't have taken the bribe. Or take it, and you too. But I'd advise, get ID. Luke wrote back, Can't I wait? Think about it for a while? That was what Luke wanted. Or not even to think, but to hide from thinking for a while. He wanted to remember Jin and grieved for her by himself. He wanted to have to think about the parts of the population law were good and what parts were bad, or why his family didn't have more money. He didn't want to have to figure out Jin's dad and other people like him, or could pretend to be so many different things. He didn't want to have to decide something now that could change the rest of his life. But Jin's dad had written back, Don't know. Maybe a case of now or never. Luke scrawled, Why? Jin's dad wrote for a long time, then he turned the paper to Luke. It said, I have power now. Tomorrow, probably. Next week? Next year? Can't tell with our government. Favored lackey one day, persona non grata the next. Never know. No guarantees. That means that you could have a job one day or then get canned the next day. Luke stared at the paper until the words blurred together. He had to decide. Now. He thought about reading and daydreaming in the attic the rest of his life. His parents were kind to him even if they weren't around much. And as much as Matthew and Mark had always teased him, he was pretty sure they would take care of him if his parents couldn't someday. His life was very limited. He understood that now more than ever. But he was used to it. It was safe. He could make himself be happy. Except. Luke remembered how bored he'd felt before meeting Jin, how desperate he'd been to do something, anything, besides read and daydream. He'd been so desperate that he'd risked his life for a chance of meeting another third child. Did he want to spend the rest of his life feeling that desperate? Did he just want to waste it? But even if he got a fake ID, what would he do? The answer was there instantly, as if he'd known it all along, and his brain was just waiting for him to come looking. He could do something to help other thrilled children come out of hiding. Not with another big dramatic rally like Jin had tried, or finding fake IDs the way Jin's dad did. Maybe there was something smaller and slower he could do. Studying ways to grow more food so no one would go hungry, no matter how many kids they had. Or changing the government so that farmers were allowed to raise pigs or use hydroponics, and ordinary people, not just barons, could have better lives. Or figuring out ways for people to live in outer space so they wouldn't have to be too crowded on Earth and chop down beautiful woods just for houses. He didn't know exactly what he could do to those things, or even what the right thing was to do, but he wanted to do something. He remembered what he told Jin the last time he'd seen her. It's people like you who change history. People like me, we just let things happen to us. And he believed it. That was how his family had always lived. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe he could succeed where Jin had failed precisely because he wasn't a baron, because he didn't have her sense that the world owed him everything. He could be more patient, more cautious, more practical. But he'd never be able to do anything staying and hiding. He bit his lip. His hands shook as he wrote his answer. I want a fake ID, please. This is it. Alright, it's the last chapter right here. That's it. Lee Grant settled into the car that would take him away from the farm where he'd found refuge after running away from home. He'd gotten lost. He'd certainly never intended to end up here. He surveyed the dusty barnyard in front of him, the ugly ruts of dried mud where tractors and trucks had left their tracks. He stared at the ramshackle barn and the peeling paint on the weathered house, sights that should have been entirely foreign to him, but weren't. Luke gulped, unable to keep thinking in his new identity quite yet. It was too soon, too hard, when his shoulders still felt the warmth of Mother's last hug. He looked down at his hands, clenched together in his lap, and they already seemed like someone else's against the background of crisp new trousers. No more ragged blue jeans and hand-me-down flannel shirts for him. He had a whole suitcase in the trunk full of the same kind of fancy Baron clothes he laughed at all those months ago. He didn't care about the clothes, but he wished they'd let him keep his name at least. Yet Jen's father had been proud that he'd gotten him the same initials. So his new name is Luke, or Lee Grant. So instead of Luke Garner, so LG still. A rush job like this, it's no wonder you're not stuck with Alfonso Xerxes. He bragged in the letter he dropped off the night before, pretending he was just coming to ask Luke's parents to cut back the willow tree that draped over into the Talbots' land. The real Lee Grant was a baron. He had died in a skiing accident just the night before. His parents wanted nothing to do with Luke. Too painful, Jen's father had explained. But they had agreed to donate their son's name and identity card the way people had once donated hearts and kidneys. Some secret group that helped third children had arranged it. The group also had agreed to pay for Luke to go to a private school as a boarder year-round. Supposedly he was transferring during the middle of the term as a punishment for running away. He'd read about such places in the old books in the attic. It seemed a strange way to live, without a family, but he was just glad to not have to pretend to love another set of parents. Now Luke looked back at his family's porch, where Mother and Dad and Matthew and Mark were standing and already waving. Dad and Matthew looked gruff, and Mark merely looked serious. Strange enough for him. But tears were streaming down Mother's face. She cried too, the night Luke had told his parents everything.
Everything.
He started with his first visit to Jen's house, and Mother had immediately scolded. "Oh, Luke, how could you? The danger. I know you're lonely, but, honey, promise us never again." "That's not all," Luke said. He told the rest of the story without looking at her until he reached the end and his decision to get a fake ID. And then the sound of her sobbing made it impossible to avoid looking. She was red-eyed, devastated. "Luke, no. You can't," she gasped. "Don't you know how we miss you?" "But, Mother, I don't want to go," Luke said. "It's just that I have to. I can't spend the rest of my life hiding in the attic. What will happen when you and Dad can't take care of me anymore?" "Matthew and Mark will," she replied. "But I don't want to be a burden on them. I want to do something with my life. Figure out ways to help other third kids make..." All the things he thought of sounded too childish to explain in the face of Mother's sobbing. So he finished weakly. "Make a difference in the world." "I'm not saying you can never do that," she answered. "But that's years away. We'll figure out some way to get you a fake ID for you when you're grown up somehow." She turned to Luke's father. "Tell him, Harlan." Dad sighed heavily. "The boy's right. He needs to go now if he can." Luke could tell his father's words came out painfully, but they stabbed at him. Maybe part of him had been secretly hoping his parents would forbid him to go, would lock him in the attic and keep him as their little boy forever. "I've checked around, to see if anyone's heard of a third child getting to live a normal life. Around here they can't," Dad said. "As far as I can tell, he's not going to get another chance." Luke turned back to his mother, because it was too hard to look at Dad while he was saying that. But the pain-twisting mother's face was worse. "And I guess we don't have a choice," she murmured. That had been 2 days ago, and ever since then she'd called in sick to work and stayed home, spending every second with Luke. They'd played board games and cards, but she interrupted every move with, "Do you remember?" or "I remember." The coups he made as a baby, his first steps, his delight in discovering dirt in the spring when he was 2, the first time he hoed a straight row, the zucchini he'd grown as long as his arm, the bedtime stories and tucking ins. She was filling him up with memories he knew, for the times when he'd have no one to talk to about his childhood. But it was hard to listen to. He wished they could just move their Monopoly pieces and pretend time wasn't ticking away. But all too soon this morning had come. Jen's dad had pulled up the fancy car and sprang out to shake hands with Luke's parents. "Mr. Garner, Mrs. Garner, thank you very much for reporting this boy's arrival immediately. From what I hear, the Grants are worried sick." He turned to Luke. "Young man, what you did was irresponsible and reckless. The only smart thing you did was remember to take your ID card. I guess you must have heard the population police shoot first and ask questions later. So they're even like faking that part, right? Yep. He clapped Luke on the back and slid his hands down to slip something into Luke's pocket. Luke reached down to touch the stiff edge of an ID card. His ID card. Do we have to start pretending already? Luke's mother whispered, the tears beginning in her eyes. Jen's dad was shaking his head sternly and patting his chest as if looking for something in a hidden pocket. Bugged, he mouthed. When Luke's parents nodded to show they understood, he stopped patting and pulled out an official-looking paper. Ah, here they are, your travel papers. Your parents are sending you to Hendricks School for Boys, and if you don't shape up... Jen's dad gave him a stern look that somehow conveyed a sympathy. Would... Mother cleared her throat. Would it be all right if we gave him a hug goodbye? We've gotten kind of fond of him in the time he's been here. Jen's father nodded, and both Luke's parents held him tight and released him. Be a good boy now here, Mother said. Luke could tell she was trying to make it jokey, the way she might talk to some other mother's runaway son. But if the life of him, he couldn't come back with a joking response. He only nodded, blinking hard. And then he stumbled to the car and tried to be Lee. Jen's dad circled the car and slid in his own driver's side. He started the car and pulled out. You're just lucky you're getting such a highly paid chauffeur, he said. If I weren't a personal friend of your father's cousin. Luke wasn't sure if there was a hidden message in the words, or if Jen's dad was just talking for the sake of the bug. He decided he couldn't analyze it yet. He peered back at his frantically waving family until they were out of sight. Soon the car was passing the other side of the barn and the field beyond. Luke's view Luke has never seen, though he lived his entire life within 100 yards of them. In spite of the fear gnawing in his stomach and the anguish of missing his family, already he felt a thrill of excitement. There was so much to see. He'd have to tell Jen. Jen. The grief he'd been avoiding for days welled over him again. But I'm doing this for you too, Jen, he whispered, too softly for Jen's dad or the bug to hear over the car's hum. Someday when we're all free, all third children, I'll tell everybody about you. They'll erect statues to you and name holidays after you. It wasn't much, but it made him feel better, a little. Luke stared back at his family's farm as long as he could. He could see just the roof of Jen's house beyond the sparse line of trees. And then, in no time at all, it seemed, everything familiar disappeared over the horizon. Lee Grant turned around to see what lay ahead.